wrote something wild. I mean, I lighten my speech around things that are very heavy, so I apologize.
Oh, no.
Like, wow, crazy, but no.
Yeah.
No, this
so
is
cool.
This is so
Radical.
cool. But it is. You painted every damn panel.
When you self-publish, you hand over the PDF to the printer, and they go, okay, well, what paper are you going to have? And they figure out the number of pages and the paper and the stock and everything, and they come back to you and they go, okay, here's the last thing you're going to do. We need something this thick. And the spine was 1/3 of an inch, 0.34 inches. The stack of art, when I stack it all up, is about 4 inches tall, right? It took about 4.5 years. And as I'm designing this 1/3 of an inch spine, I'm going 4+ inches of art and pages of art, 4.5 years of research, of travel, of visiting the mountains that they fought in and everything else, are distilled down to that 1/3 of an inch. 440 is a story of a group of Japanese American soldiers that chose to fight for a country that wouldn't fight for them. 10,000 Japanese Americans who were in the camps or had family in the camps or somehow related to that, chose to fight for a country. And those 10,000 ended up earning over 18,000 medals over the course of about 20 months of battle. So in just over a year and a half, 18,000 medals. They are the most decorated unit of soldiers in U.S. history that we kind of let get forgotten in time. And so my goal with this story is to weave a journey through the actual history where we can experience a bit of their story and less so sort of memorize the facts of history, right? There's a lot of World War II that you can cover about the Japanese American experience, but I am focusing on about 12 days of World War II and an chapter known as the Rescue of the Lost Battalion, where 211 Texas soldiers were caught behind enemy lines, and they were rescued by the 442nd after 2 failed attempts by other battalions. But over the course of that rescue, the Japanese Americans suffered over 800 casualties to rescue those 211 Texas soldiers. So, and that's their mentality, right? They're like, hey, we're losing men, but if you want us to accomplish this goal, you want us to do something, we're going to figure out a way to do it. And so they persevered where other battalions would not have. Yeah, that's 442nd.
Why did I get cold chills even though you already told me this? I got cold chills again. This is such an incredible story. And you were talking a little bit about how people connect to history through art. Talk to me about the paintings inside.
When I first started breathing life into this concept, and I kind of was like, okay, am I going to really do this? I'm going to take on this task of telling a history, and it's a big part of history and doing it right. I knew that I can do it kind of as a traditional comic where I could get help, right? I could, hey, I'm going to pencil it and maybe do some inking. I get someone to help digitally color it. You know, comics is a team sport. You have all these different roles that people can play. For any comic out there, generally there's 3 or 4 people behind the title. I think if I watercolor it and I paint it, it'll also have a larger impact, right? And even though it'll take a lot more time, and there's less controls, there's not a control Z you can do with watercolors. You know, redo this and copy and paste stuff. It's much more difficult. But it was probably one of the best decisions I made to kind of do it, because watercoloring and doing something traditionally, something that has history, forces the reader, I think, to spend 2 more seconds, right, to look at the art, because it's just very different.
Can you show me your favorite one?
I'll talk a little bit about this page. Let's see. It's right here. I can send you this image. I did not make this composition up. Everything, the words in this, from a political cartoon in 1944. And I saw this cartoon. There are lots of political cartoons around that time, some that were incredibly racial in their what they were trying to provoke, and then some that were, you know, kind of against everything, and you're like, oh, that was new perspective. And what this is showing is an injured Japanese American veteran coming back from the war. In order to go home now, you have to get on a boat. The boat brings you across the Atlantic. You land somewhere on the East Coast, and then you have to take a train all the way across because Japanese Americans, for the most part, lived on the West Coast. And you have to take a train all the way across America, which was several days. And the train would stop in small towns, right? Other places, and you would want to get a drink. Some soldiers wanted to get a haircut so they can look good for their families that they haven't seen in years. This is showing a veteran coming back, trying to get a drink at a small bar. And in this original black and white, it showed the bartender pointing at a little sign that says, "No Japs allowed." But all the other signs that you see here, "Welcome to the West Coast," the Victory Bar, "Do your due duty, buy war bonds," and this one here was actually in there from 1944. It says, "America for Americans." That hits.
It does.
And I saw this little black and white cartoon, and I stared at it longer than I've stared at probably anything in the Art Institute here in Chicago, right? And I was like, I have to recreate this, repaint this. And the caption underneath that comic was, "Hey, can't you read the signs? Where is he going home to?" It's 1944. He's heading to the West Coast. His home, after losing a leg, getting injured in war, fighting in Europe, seeing the worst of the worst, his home is now behind barbed wire. You would go and fight, put your life on the line, somehow survive, travel across America experiencing these kind of sentiments, to go back home behind barbed wire to live in an internment camp for the rest of the war. What could possibly be going through someone's mind while they're experiencing this? And so hopefully what that one guy did in one image, I can do in one book, or it's a series of books, because this is the first of 3 books.
Okay, so it's a series.
Yeah. Number 1.
Wow.
So this is act 1 of the story.
What's your timeline on the...
So it took me most of the last 4 years to do the research, to interview people, to talk to people who knew a lot more than I'm not one of those people who are World War II, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a historian. And so it took me a long time to kind of do that. And in fact, I had to kind of restart, because when I first started, I didn't know what I didn't know yet. I thought I could tell the story in like 5 or 6 issues of a comic. I started involving myself into the community of the Japanese American veterans and things like that. And started learning once I started actually doing research, traveling to the World War II History Museum, talking to Japanese American veterans, not of World War II, but like just in general, understanding what it meant. I realized, I have to do a lot more. I would do a few podcasts, or I would do a few Q&A sessions at places, and people would respond and they're like, "Oh, thank you for being a spokesperson for this. Thank you for standing up for this." And I was like, I'm just like, "What do you mean spokesperson? Like I'm just a comic guy." And then on top of that, I get questions like, "Have you gone to the internment camp? Have you been here? Do you know about this?" And I was like, "Oh no, I've never been to internment camp." I realized that if I was going to really do this and give it justice, I had to do as much personal research as I could possibly do outside of my browser.
Like, you took this on as something so much bigger than writing a comic. Like, you took personal responsibility for it because you knew that you didn't have maybe all the knowledge that it would take to give it justice, like to do it justice. You had a lot of knowledge, and you had the right instinct and the right passion to want to bring it to light, but you also took the extra responsibility of doing more. There's something different about comics, because you get art and you get literature. You get to read and you get the visual as well, and it tells a different story. Not wasting as many words on building the setting, because the setting's right in front of you.
What really draws me into like the comics and stuff like that in general is the fact that you get a movie just force feeds you stuff. You sit back, it's a very passive thing, and you just it gets thrown in your face. Reading is intensive for a lot of people. You have to focus, take time. You got to get through chapters and chapters to kind of get a concept. I think comics is the perfect happy medium, and there's a, people talk about in between the panels, right? And in order to go from panel 1 where I give you something and panel 2 where I give you something else, you have to conjure up what happens in that. And I think for a story like this, that's what I want. I want you to put yourself, I want you to be a little bit active. I also want to prompt some thoughts, or put some images in there, right? And so some of these images in here where I want you to rethink, right? Well, when I repainted these sort of big propaganda posters, Uncle Sam wants you for the U.S. Army. Not if you're Japanese, though, right? We can do it, with Rosie the Riveter. But if you're Japanese, you can do it over there. I want to prompt some thoughts, but I want you to think as your eye is traveling and carrying through the art and everything else. I really like that about comics, when comics tries to be something a little bit more than just cool poses in the rain.
Pictures
on
and
a guy,
babes, guys with
spandex,
muscles and
on a gargoyle and then the top of New York City or something like that.
I think when you mention the space between the panels, it's the time. That's the time the reader gets to take, where they get to pause and they get to fill in. So it gives you space to have imagination, which you don't really get that built into books. Maybe you get a chapter, but that's not even the same thing.
Yeah.
And in movies, you're at the mercy of the timing of the editors. And so I think that's a really good point. I like the way that you said that. Have you read other, I guess, historical comics like this? Have you read anything similar to this before?
First books that I remember reading that was beyond just the typical spandex and capes, and is actually kind of pertinent to today because she just passed away, was Persepolis. As a kid who loves comics for all the stereotypical reasons that a boy would like comics, right? The muscles, the babes, the spandex, the capes, the heroic poses. I don't know how I ended up with a copy of Persepolis. Or who said, hey, you should check this out. But I do remember starting to read, and it's about a young girl growing up in Iran, is it? And during the Cultural Revolution there and everything else that was happening, and somehow it captivated me and gave me a perspective that I should not have. I remember just reading the whole thing. After the first 15 pages or so, I was like, okay, I'm in. And that was one of my first experiences with the fact that for comics beyond the stereotypical, right? And there were definitely issues that I remember, where Incredible Hulk, and they talk about, there's an issue about AIDS and stuff like that, and there's some pivotal issues about LGBTQ and stuff like that. But those are elemental issues within a larger gestalt of stories that don't get singled out as much if you kind of, if you're not in the month to month repetition of comics. And so that was the first one, and I still recommend that one a lot to people.
Very recognizable
style.
See a poster of
it. I use it as an example for all the aspiring comic artists and whatever else. And then also just as a reminder to myself, it doesn't have to be picture perfect or immaculate or whatever. It just has to hit. And that can be a variety of different types of styles of art. And that one was one of them where I was like, the art just fit and it worked, and you caught the expressions and the concern and you felt for the character and the environment, and you learned. I had no idea the cultural impact of what was happening in the Middle East and the US and everything else, So I learned a lot from that. And that is probably one of the things that sits in the back of my mind as I do stuff like this.
I think we forget that there are comics being published around the world too. And the cultural impact based off of whatever culture the person's bringing in with them matters. So I think you saying that you're writing this from the perspective of an Asian American and it's a minority, like a minority in general. And you said that part of the inspiration from this came from after COVID and the way that Asian Americans were facing discrimination after COVID.
Yeah.
And so I love the propaganda that you put into this,
Yeah.
like not your propaganda, the propaganda.
But it's a rethinking of that propaganda,
right? Of okay, you're telling people to go back home when one, this is their home. You're telling people they're not allowed. Well, they're fighting for this country. So how do you reconcile that? The cognitive dissonance just doesn't make sense.
No, no. So the timeline is Pearl Harbor. 2 months after Pearl Harbor, the Executive Order 9066 happens, internment camps are put into real life, right? Japanese Americans start moving there. They're there for almost a year in the middle of nowhere. Part of the research of going to the internment camps is not just being at the internment camps, it's getting there, right?
Where are they?
I went to Vegas, got a car. I drove across this, through this place called Death Valley. Mm-hmm. I remember seeing you are now exiting Death Valley National Park, right? Drove past that sign, made a right turn, and about 15 minutes later, I am at Manzanar. And so most of Japanese Americans, the majority of the population was West Coast. Some Japanese Americans, once they kind of put this line, they immediately moved, like, okay, we're kind of close, we're going to move as fast as we can. And then they moved it again.
So, but you're going from, if they're closer to the coast, it's more mild weather, to Death Valley is one of the hottest places.
Absolutely. Japanese Americans at the time were one of two main professions were fishermen and farmers. And so they went from arid land or working the land to desert. They went from fishing the sea, ocean breezes and things like that, to desert. There's actually a lot of things that I've read where you get these Japanese Americans who had lived most of their life by the ocean, by the water, doing this. We moved so far inland that they just like, I miss the water, I miss the sea, I miss the ocean, I miss the salt, I miss the smell.
And Japan is, it's bigger than you think it is, right? Yeah. But it's still pretty coastal. Like when you look at it, there's a lot of coast. Yeah,
it's a super large archipelago. Planning the travel to the internment camp is part of that research and part of that history and part of that experience, to realize as you're driving, just like, how did these people get here? What was that like on that?
Were they escorted?
Train? Yeah. They were put on trains. They were first brought into holding camps, and then from these camps, then brought into, because they had to build these internment camps.
Who built the internment camps?
Oh, I have a story there. Manzanar was the first internment camp. So when Executive Order 9066 came out, there was no internment camps. They had to build them from scratch. The Japanese Americans were given 1 month to get their affairs in order before they had to be in a camp. Right? So you have 4 weeks to sell your house, your car, your home for whatever you can get, to pack whatever you can do. You can only bring what you can carry, right? So every man and woman could have 2 suitcases to encapsulate your entire life, right? Whatever your pursuit of the American dream was, you can't bring that with you. And so you had 4 weeks of freedom, so to speak. However, if you are willing to give up 2 of those weeks, the U.S. government would allow you to drive your car to the location of Manzanar, the first internment camp, to help build the internment camp. But since you brought your car, you can bring whatever you wanted, whatever you can fit in the car. I can't imagine what that was like driving to this camp, to our imprisonment, to build it, because it wasn't built.
So then where were you sleeping with your family while you were, did they do tents or?
Probably at the time, there was combinations of tents. There were some barracks, but they had to build the pipelines for water, sewage, everything that needed to be there. So it wasn't just like outhouses. Because they were built from scratch in these places, they had sort of the most modern of facilities, I guess, which incited a lot of jealousy from the nearby small towns, because they would have, let's say, have wells at the time that they have to go, whereas
jealous
water.
People who are in prison.
100%. No. The irony is there.
So being in LA, there are monuments and museums, and I can't remember which museum I was in, but they had lists of families and photos, and I remember seeing something like it was an example of things people could take, because museums love to say, this is what you'd have in a bag, and Yeah, it definitely hit me how much it resonates more on the West Coast.
Yes.
But did it happen in other places in the country too, or was it primarily West Coast?
So it was primarily West Coast. The US was split into, I think it was 4 zones. And there were different commanders, I guess, in these zones. And the 2 places where you had the most Japanese Americans at the time were West Coast and Hawaii, right? About a third of the population of Hawaii was Japanese American.
Did they have a camp in?
This speaks to the people in charge, let's say the commander. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the guy in charge of like the sort of the West Coast was as anti-Japanese as you can imagine. The guy who was in charge of the Pacific and Hawaii was like, a third of our population is Japanese. If you're going to ask me to put a third of this population into camps, there's repercussions to that. They're kind of part of everything. And so while there were some small camps in Hawaii, this guy was basically like, yeah, I'm getting to it. Yeah. No, we're working on it. Yeah. There were some Japanese Americans that did not live on the West Coast that did not get put in. One of the guys that will be in the book, I made sure to put him in for that reason. He grew up in New York. He was a Japanese American from New York. His childhood was surrounded by, as you would in New York, by like everyone that's not Japanese, right? He had French friends and Moroccan friends. And then in fact, when they created the 442nd, and it's like, hey, we're going to allow Japanese Americans to fight in the war. He's like, oh, I want to be a part of this. That's when he first kind of meets and befriends his first Japanese American friends. There's this culture that I'm not familiar with. And he was a very, very respected, and he was a medic. So he was a very interesting character and provides that exact juxtaposition of perspective, I think, right?
That's really powerful. And I'm going to just go ahead and say thank you for that, because I think those multiple perspectives are really important to people. I mean, even for someone from my background, a lot of media around people from my background are people very embedded in the culture. It's always nice to see people interacting with the culture differently too. Well, I'm really excited to read it. Any final words you want to say about it?
I did not expect it to take me quite so long to do this one. But obviously I had to finish this project in between all the other projects that were paying me, right? And so hopefully the next 2 books won't take so long because all the research has been done now. One of the things with this project and history is learning that there's still so much more. With 18,000 medals, there's 18,000 stories. What's not in this, for instance, is the fact that the first soldiers to step foot in Dachau, the Jewish concentration camp, were Japanese Americans. So if you can imagine for a moment being Japanese American and being the first ones to step in and liberate a death camp over in Europe, you walk past that barbed wire, the guard towers that are there, the barracks that look very, very similar as well. And then knowing that your family is, albeit different ends of the spectrum, but your family's back there, or you came from it and whatever else, like that is one of the things that I would love to tackle.
I don't know if you ever see the artist editions of comics.
Yeah.
The Batman Year One, Mazzucchelli, the artist edition that's like this big.
Here is it?
Yeah, and some of the, like, you can read the whole comic in there. You wouldn't, because the pages are massive. You get like the full-size paintings and everything in that as well. I mean, you could be a coffee table book someday soon. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting point of perspective. You know, I'm obviously very, very proud of it, but it's also like, okay, time to work on the next one.
Okay, since you gave me a gift, would you mind sharing just like
Yeah, I saw that you posted that you just got into the Max, and I think you actually did a little post about the Batman Max or something like that. And I was like, oh, well, I did one of the variant covers. So I still have a couple of these laying around, and yeah, I would like to gift this to you.
Did you sign it?
I guess I should do that.
Do you mind? I'll pay you for it.
It's fine. We'll sign it. It was my first work for one of the big 2. It was a rush job. It was one of the few rush jobs that I am still very happy with how it turned out. And one of the challenges was painting Batman on a very bright background, because he's often a character that you associate with like rain and darkness and shadows.
Yeah.
And I really wanted on Max's you know, sort of the Max's Outback and having the stones and the sort of the bright colors that Max is known for. And in the process, like, how does black leather look in yellow light and
Calling this a
confidence?
rush job is wild. That's
It was
wild
painted
to
in
me.
about 2.5 days
2.5 days.
with very little sleep.
It takes me a week to figure out what I'm going to meal prep. I like just cannot believe that. I love it. Will you turn it around, please?
Of course.
Thanks. Will you do work for me?
What do you need?